to be accessed at a click. Talking Cock, the website, masterminded by Colin Goh, was initially intended for private use, but was soon a public space for satirical discourse. Mr. Brown moved online to do podcasts after his newspaper column was shut down. Perhaps the government was fed up with his progress as a satirist?
I will say, Misya my hum. My hum, my hum, my hum, my hum, my hum.
I wonder if you know how they live in Tobayo. Please not Dolong, only Lorong, not expressway, also go fast and furious. Beep, beep, beep.
As we've shown, there's no lack of satire in Singapore. It stretches across mediums and across history, providing an alternate narrative to the political history of the Singapore story. It is championed in the literary, in newspapers, on TV, films, and online media. Just as satire is a subjective concept to illustrate, its impact on society is perhaps more complex to gauge. In the next segment, we assess satire's role in popular culture and allow the experts to lay out their thoughts on pertinent issues concerning satire.
It's like an escape valve, isn't it? You watch satire, you laugh about it, you grab about it, that's how it is. Huh? And then you kind of feel good about it. So I actually think it's beneficial.
It's good for them to allow satire because then, frustrated people like me can vent, right? We can ventilate and all of that without going to their, offices and banging the doors down and killing them, you know what I mean?
Satire helps you or helps society to be self-effacing.
Well, the function is to draw attention, if possible, gently, even elegantly, to certain things that may need correction, that people may not be aware of. In the non-political area, it could be to draw attention to certain traits that are not exactly likable in human beings. Deception, hypocrisy, this has often been the target of satire, hypocrisy, which none of us likes. Yes. And then in the political field, to draw attention to certain situations, certain policies, situations, conditions, which may not be good for the country in the long run, which may expose certain things in a leadership. And that, I think, is a good thing. In fact, that is what a healthy, robust society should be about.
It demands that people in power become more accountable. Where the leader feels particularly targeted, then he or she has to come out and account. So it takes away complacency from our leadership. I mean, the satirist in any society hates complacency.
I suspect the government takes a rather benign view towards satire. They don't like anything that is hard-hitting, because I think in our Confucianist context, that would be seen as disrespect. You don't tell a person straight to his face, you are doing wrong, you are this, that. In fact, I think why my earliest political commentaries created such a sensation, caused such a stir, was because they were probably seen as disrespect. You tell me straight to my face that I'm not in charge, that I've got things wrong. Now that would be intolerable.
Politicians are always cautious about the satirist because the satirist has within his or her power to demand that accountability in the end.
There are no guidelines for classification of satire. And if you look at, probably Jack Neo's films are good examples. Some of that satire is pretty biting, but it's really not been an issue. I think our censorship is stricter with foul language and profanity than it is with satire.
When we first started TalkingCock.com in 2000, we were debated in Parliament in 2002. Then the ministers talked about whether they could quote-unquote catch us. And that made me hell of a scared. I was so afraid that I would be hauled up to Whitley Road Detention Centre and have my fingernails pulled off just because I told some stupid joke. Singapore's government is actually not as monolithic as people think it is. There's definitely a new generation who seem to be more receptive, or at least understand the need for greater intellectual diversity.
Do satirists claim to be the voice of the people, presenting something closer to the heart? In other words, how authentic is satire? is authenticity necessarily linked to good satire?
It's definitely authentic coming from me. In other words, there's honesty. I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was honest. I gather that the major point is the lack of political freedom. People may disagree with me in terms of details, but generally, I think you have a whole lot of Singaporeans saying, yes.
At the core of the satirical comment would be something which would be very, very realistic. Therefore, will be a kernel of truth. I can imagine that Pin Pin's movie, Singapore Gaga, would probably not have been allowed, say, during the time of the early Lee Kuan Yew. But it really satirizes Singapore. All right, Singapore Dreaming as a movie is what I would call okay satire. It's not really strong. It's not overly powerful. And this is why everybody was happy with it. President Nathan was there, ministers were there. Because unlike talking cock, right, it doesn't penetrate. It's very fine-tuned humor that finds within itself its own capacity to criticize and also its own ability to handle and cope with that criticism.
The motive must be genuine. It cannot be purely gratuitous, something sadistic, something, I don't care for that kind of thing.
Right now the situation is nobody can say for sure whether we are ever going to langar or bump up against some out of bounds marker. I'm now wondering whether satire has served its purpose. Has it really changed policies in Singapore? And I'm also beginning to wonder whether we are now just some tool. I wonder whether the authorities think, well, maybe if the people are allowed to laugh about policies, then they won't notice if we don't actually do anything about them. Singapore needs action for change. All the satirists right now are basically just providing all these escape valves, and people are relying on them and not really thinking about what they need to do to make their society better.
People, first of all, need to be mature enough to understand satire. Satire itself is a very sophisticated form. Apart from Mr. Brown, and he's not that young, but word for word, punch for punch, I think the kind of satire that someone like Kishore Mahbubani was capable of in a very serious article, Siva Choi in funny articles, Bill Jensen, those kind of guys, I think they were really satirical. To that extent, I would see a decline, actually, in satiric sensibility among Singaporeans.
If we have more satire, that actually could be an indicator that we are getting more mature.
With this, we've explored how Singapore's satire has evolved with society through the years. In the 21st century, satire seems to adamantly continue fulfilling its multiple roles. Who knows? We might see some Singaporeans being remembered as the next Cicero, the next Aristophanes, the next Jack Neo, or the next Colin Goh for their work in satire. But a few things are for sure.
They also celebrate good things as well. Things that make us unique, things that make us Singaporeans. Satire is just part and parcel of the fabric of life and of popular entertainment. It serves as a record of the norms and values and feelings and sentiments of that particular point in time.
If you can't laugh at yourself, you have no right to laugh at anybody.
Satire has reached because it's entertaining and humor exposes absurdities in a way that maybe reasoned debate sometimes can't.